Okay, we're good to go. Welcome, everybody. I just want to introduce today's guest is Dr. Anne McCloskey. She'll be familiar to most of my followers, and especially during the lockdown era, but before that, because she's been quite active on a number of fronts all of her life. So my name is Jerry O'Neill. Just before I forget to introduce myself, this is a series of interviews that I've been running and will continue to run under the title of the Scholar Gypsies. I'm a writer predominantly on the West Awake, so you'll see all the details and description on how you can check that out. But today I want to start start this conversation with my first question. And we had a conversation on the phone maybe a month ago, and I think you were in Medjugorje or somewhere like that, but you mentioned in it that you're a public sector, you're basically a public doctor all of your life, and you've never been in medicine or you know, the arena of helping people for the monetary aspects of it. And I suppose it's a good segue into a bit about your own life as to how you got how you decided you wanted to be a medical doctor in the first place, but also a little bit of a differential between kind of the way medicine works in the north and the south, because like we tend to see down here, you know, doctors go into the public health system, but they start on a ladder to becoming some class of a consultant, and then they're kind of in this. They end up in this kind of public-private capacity where they're getting a full salary from the public sector while also having private practices, you know, where they earn money, lots of money from, and it puts pressure on our health system. So I suppose it's a long-winded introduction, but I'm kind of interested in, you know, you're very certain about, you know, and proud, I'd sensed, of the fact that you're a public doctor as opposed to somebody that's in the private sector.
Yeah, well, I wasn't one of these people that always wanted to be a doctor, but I was, you know, I actually was interested in biochemistry, and I was particularly fascinated by molecular biology and genetics. This is even as, you know, at school. I was always in trouble at school, but you know, there were things that I was interested in. I was always in trouble, deservedly so, I may add, but you know, like there were aspects of it that really interested me. So I did at A level, I did biology, chemistry, physics, English and Irish, because I loved Irish. I speak Irish, and I love English. I love a lot, you know, I'm going to blow a bit of smoke here. That's why I love reading. You know, I love reading. I love good writing, and I you know, really enjoy that. But yeah, so I wanted to do you know, molecular biology or you know, genetics or biochemistry or something like that. But being a proud Irish Republican from Derry during the Troubles, I wanted to go to university in the capital city of my country, which of course is Dublin. So my father, I had the choice, because I contrary to all expectations, did okay in my exams, and I had the choice of going to Trinity or UCD, and my father, being a very proud Irish Republican Catholic, said, nope, Newman's University has to be. And I say I could have skipped pre-med by going to Trinity and shortened it by a year. But sure, I had a ball. The first year I had nothing to do, because it was, and pints were 23p. I remember it well, in the Belfast bar. that's given away a bit about what vintage I'm from. Yeah, I have the double bus pass now. But yeah, so I went to Dublin, and no regrets. I absolutely loved it, and I joined Sinn Féin in Freshers Week UCD 1975. If anybody wants to dig out those records, you will see that I signed up. Now, I never was particularly active, but I didn't like the Dublin set, because they were all kind of political heads, and they did the Literary and Historical Debating Society. And to be honest, I couldn't have been arsed with it. So I kind of, yeah. But so that I went, and I always, then once I got into it, I mean, I've no regrets. I loved it. But medicine, actually, contrary to what most people think, I mean, you know, us medical doctors talk about people with PhDs in physics and maths and chemistry and in absolute awe, and we call them real doctors. You know, if you have a PhD in those things, you know stuff. Medicine's really just plodding through and learning. And as I say, certainly over the last couple of years, it's bizarre because I found it so humbling to understand that almost everything that I was proud of knowing is probably horseshit. You know, you're unlearning stuff, you know, and people are ringing up and asking me things now that I would have been quite confident about answering a couple of years ago. And now I'm going, you know, because I've just read Mark Bailey's paper, Farewell to Virology. It's a 67-page, closely referenced treatise on essentially debunking the whole theory of virology and showing how, I mean, we know about the Flexner report and all these things, but this actually is, I'm not saying it's gospel, but what I'm saying is it's a very compelling case to say that at the very least you can say is that there's no proof, no hard scientific proof that viruses even exist. And you know, it's a circular argument where they take snot from somebody who's sick, they mix it up with monkey cells and with antibiotics, and they boil up this toxic soup and inject it into another animal and go, oh, look, the animal got sick. And then they take degradation products and look at those and say, oh, this is the virus, we have found it, without doing a control experiment. The control experiment, anybody who knows anything with scientific method, is you need to do an identical process with something from, you know, without bringing the sick snot into it, you know, and keep everything else exactly the same. That never happened at any time. And it you know, certainly Mark Bailey makes a compelling case that what we now have are these genetic sequences, computer generated sequences, which are then matched with therapeutics. You know, that sort of, you know, that this is a template for a therapeutic, but where the template came from, these things are in silico. I mean, we know that the whole COVID thing was respiratory secretions from one patient in China. And then on that was based the PCR, and really, I suppose in 2020, sorry, in the very spring of 2020, I understood that the PCR is the key to it all. And then you have people like Mike Eden pointing this out. But anyway, so yeah, I worked, as I say, as a GP, and I started off, I was going to be a pediatrician, and I worked in the Royal in Belfast, and it was funny because they were quite keen in those days. This now is the early 80s, and there was one of the consultants there who was saying to me, he says, so if you stick with this, you know, you know, we'll make your path easy. And I was laughing. I was going, you're just trying to straighten up the figures. You just want a female Fenian, don't you? And he was laughing. He was going, well, yeah, because the figures at that time were appalling. It was, you know, all, you know, white Anglo-Saxon unionists, and they were, you know, particularly in these big teaching centres. So I was more or less told that, oh yeah, you know, the chair of pediatrics, you know, or you know, nudge nudge, wink wink, life will be made pretty easy. And you know, I was interested in it. I worked for a year in perinatal intensive care, looking after wee mites that landed on this planet before they were due to be born, and it was the best job ever. It was just so rewarding. But for me, that I as you may know, I'm very, very pro-life in my views, and you know, for me, it wasn't really initially religious. It was watching those wee scraps of humanity trying to live and fighting, and they hated us because that was back in the day before there were sort of arterial lines and that, and we used to have to stab them to get blood and do arterial samples to get their blood gases and put up drips on their wee heads, and it was they hated it, and, you know, yeah. Cut them out, but watching the way that that absolute innate desire to take their place in the family of the human race. And even at that stage, you could look and say, you know, the father would come in, you go, God, that child's as bloody you. You know, even though it was a wee mite of a thing. And, you know, they had personalities. There were some who were very placid and some who were crabbed. And, you know, they had one, I remember a child had a birthmark on its shoulder that was identical to the mother's, and you just going, this is this is one of us. And some of them didn't make it, obviously, and it was heart-rending. And we had but in those days they had a Christmas party for the particularly the wee ones that had spent a long time in perinatal intensive care, and they used to turn up at Christmas, you know, maybe hadn't seen them for a few months, and they were, you know, at themselves. And obviously some had problems. You had some who had, you know, cerebral palsy, or, you know, that weren't, they still had difficulties from being from arriving too soon. But it was just a wonderful job. But
and
then we decided to go. Sorry,
I wanted to ask you a question there on kind of just on that notes, because obviously we would have had between the North and the South at that time quite different abortion laws. Like we didn't stances is what I should say, legally. And was that what was the environment like in the North at that stage? And in terms of I think it was in the 60s when the legislation changed in the UK.
You know, that never extended to the North. Abortion.
Oh, it never extended to North Ireland.
No. And in fact, the abortion laws in the North were among the strictest in Europe, and until very, very recently continued to be. And actually, it happened during a time when Stormont was. I mean, there's been opinion poll after opinion poll in the North on that very question, and overwhelmingly, the population here, when asked, have voted for no change in the legislation. No.
You were going through the stats there. Just a quick question I wanted to ask you on that is, how did you view the whole referendum campaigns in the South, and were you involved with them?
Well, funny, I was at a meeting and in a showing last night, looking at setting up, you know, a sort of an Inishowen based pro-life group. Inishowen, as you know, Derry's the capital of Inishowen, even though Inishowen's County Donegal and Derry's ostensibly in the north. The border goes out around the city of Derry. Yeah, so we like to think that we got one county in Ireland, Donegal, and we Derry people like to think that we filled carloads. Myself and Francie and Anne Brawley and their daughters and people from the town, and day after day after day, the day of the referendum, the day before the referendum, we were up in Fannet Head, going door to door and knocking. So obviously, I think Donegal's different anyway, but we like to think that it was the northern manpower. You know, I mean, seriously, there were days there was 3 and 4 carloads who went, you know, to go and support the people who were doing door-to-door canvass there, and we covered the whole county. So we got one. But as I say, that, I mean, I am sure you're aware of Tim Jackson's wonderful film, Ireland's Fall, about the massive influence that well, RTE is. I mean, it's not even a media company; it's just a propaganda outfit like the BBC. But Facebook and Google in particular, in the last week before that referendum, pulled all the pro-life advertising, and you know, because the money's no obstacle to these people.
Oh no, because that referendum was a point where I thought to myself, I don't have a good sense of the pulse of the country anymore, because when I was looking at that, I was thinking, right, it's going to be close. It's going to be like 53-47, maybe 52-48. And then when the result came out, I was like absolutely gobsmacked. It was nearly 2-1. And even, I know you're saying
60% of people didn't vote, and the North wasn't included in that referendum.
Yeah,
you know,
because I live in a constituency that's probably, if you go back through the records on social issues, is probably, if not the most conservative, probably the second most conservative in terms of referendums on divorce and all of that kind of stuff in the past. And even in this one, I think, but it still was over 60% in kind of North Galway, that referendum. So, and I agree with you on the media campaign. And in fact, you got a good introduction as to how the media would behave in COVID based on looking at how they managed the pro-life, to keep the pro-life campaign out of the media in the last days.
And then, of course, what happened in the North is, as I say, opinion poll after opinion poll, people of the North, overwhelmingly, like 80% plus, have said, no, we don't want any change in the laws. We understood it wasn't required to keep women safe. Then Stormont fell, and Sinn Féin, the SDLP, the Alliance Party, and some independents marched to Westminster. Sinn Féin, who refused to recognise British jurisdiction in this country, went to Westminster and begged the Westminster Parliament to force abortion on the people of the North. And they will never, ever be allowed to forget that. And, this generation, next generation, how anybody could vote for that party, I've absolutely no idea.
Well, I thought
it was Sinn Féin a long time ago, but, that to me was just, that to me was a game changer. It just showed that they have no respect for democracy in this country.
Well, it's a good segue back into the COVID arena again, because Sinn Féin were speaking out of both sides of their arse on a lot of lockdown policies in the south and completely different ones in the north. So, like, I don't know. We're looking at probably the next government's going to be Sinn Féin, whether we like it or don't like it. What are your feelings on kind of the current makeup of Michelle O'Neill and kind of Mary Lou?
I probably shouldn't say it on the airwaves. The people of South Derry, oh no, I'll maybe not go there. The people of South Derry have a special word for the pair of them.
All right, okay.
They're called the Shows.
And do you get a sense that do you get a sense that they're actually, I always get a sense, are they just a public face of the organization? Like, because they seem an awful lot different from Adams and McGuinness as a pair, if you like. Yeah,
it's hard to know. I mean, Mary Lou is privately educated and very much involved in the corporate world and her family and all that. It's very strange. I actually knew her. I was a member of an organization called the Irish National Congress way back around the time of the ceasefires. And although in Derry, I was known as the dissident doctor because I publicly argued with Sinn Féin and was against the Good Friday Agreement, not against the ceasefires, because as my dear departed father used to say, you do not fight Muhammad Ali with boxing gloves. To send our young men out to street corners with obsolete rifles, shooting at the best equipped army in the world was just genocidal insanity. And as I say, there's our people spent 100,000 years in jail, our young men and women. I spent significant parts of my teenage years on the bus to Long Kesh. I remember a relation of my own was in McGilligan. I fancied him like crazy as well. But I used to hitchhike from Derry to Limavady. So I had to tell lies actually about my driving license, and my father, God rest him, allowed me to say I was 17 when I was only 16. So I had my full driving test before my 17th birthday because he was terrified that I was going to get mauled by a shower of loyalists and taken over a ditch. But actually, when you're going to visit a prisoner, a lot of those, the transport inside the jail, there was a lot of women, and you look at them and go, they're the same as me. They're the same as us. Women with small children, young families, going to visit their young men too. And it makes you understand. I mean, I'm reading a book at the moment called The Secret History of the First World War.
So I have that book as well.
Unreal. And it just makes you understand that to these people, we are cockroaches, and they fund both sides of every conflict, and they allow ordinary people to suffer, and they glory in watching us butcher one another, and they thrive on hatred, and it's all nonsense. It's all to serve their purpose. And as I say, the history of Ireland, I mean, I'm rambling here, but it's just the whole history of Ireland. If you look, for example, I'm for reasons that we might discuss later on, and very much interested in the whole history of around, the treaty, the rise in the treaty and partition and all of that. I mean, it's something obviously that we all, it's our common history. But it looks very much like as if the whole, I mean, after the 1916 rise, and this is a theory now, I'm not a historian, the British shot the visionaries, the poets, the intellectuals, the thinkers, and the men of absolute integrity. There's a beautiful book, you may have seen it, called Last Words, and it's the last letters to their families and the last things that they said and the last things they did. And it is just something that you couldn't fail to be inspired reading it. And it's just a collection of actual things that they wrote, the letters they wrote to, and they were the absolute leaders of a revolution. And it looks as if they were set up. It looks like as if this was, if you go back and look, follow the money, you know, there was the banks in America where the IRB loan was being gathered up and all, Chase Manhattan, the Milner Group, you know, these people were there in the shadows. And it is possible. It's again, it's a theory, and it's something that I'd love a historian, be a great PhD thesis to go and look.
Well, we know that Dev spent, well, it was in the aftermath, but Dev spent a significant amount of 1920 in the United States, with you know, bankers and trying to get, you know, trying to get recognition and all that. But now you brought up a subject there.
Michael Collins was a banker.
Yeah,
Michael Collins, you know, and then there are, yeah. It's I mean, it's the whole thing is fascinating and difficult, and we'll probably never know the truth. But
no, probably,
you know, but all of that went on here, as I say, the people in the prisons. Now, as I say, our young fellas did, you know, the numerically, and I mean, the Republican plot in Derry is full of people who were at school with me, and you know, at the same age, and people who, you know, you knew them, and it's the same in Belfast, it's the same in Armagh, you know, these, you know, and there was no real leadership, but McGuinness and Adams were of that ilk. And then came, and again, I would have been, because I was a doctor in Derry, a lot, your name was handy when the funding came. And again, there's another beautiful book called The New Politics of Sinn Féin. And I saw that happening after the Good Friday Agreement, which I opposed on ideological grounds, particularly the fact that we relinquished Articles 2 and 3 of the Irish Constitution. Because Article 3 says, pending the, you know, Article 2 says the national territory is the whole island, its offshore islands and territorial waters. Article 3 said, pending the reintegration of the national territory, the jurisdiction of the Dáil will stop at the border, essentially. But it was, the national territory was all of it. And the Gypsies then took a court case to show that this was a constitutional imperative to seek reunification. After the Irish, there were two questions asked on the two different questions asked on both sides of the border. And as I say, Mary Lou had been in the Irish National Congress at that time. And just a couple of days before, we had hundreds of thousands of leaflets printed looking for a respectable no vote south of the border, which I think we could have got. Rather than just that supine relinquishment of the territorial integrity of the island of Ireland. So for the first time in international law, Sinn Féin flipped a couple of days before and said, no, we need a yes vote, both sides. It was always going to be a yes vote in the north. People were war weary. But, you know, the south, I think we could have had we wouldn't have won, but a respectable rump.
Well, you bring up a couple of things there now, and I want to tie a few things that you've said there together. Like one would be your own path in Sinn Féin when you joined it in college as the party. That at that time that must have been a very, you know, not easy thing to be involved in. It's not like joining Sinn Féin today. Like I know one of the very few Sinn Féin councillors that were in the country in Ireland was from my village, right. And it was it was difficult. Like it was, you know, it was difficult for anyone related to Sinn Féin to talk about being in Sinn Féin that time with all the troubles. But what I suppose what I really want to get to is what was the seminal moment that you said, I have to get out of this party, or I'm not supporting it?
Going back to Sinn Féin and UCD, myself and another Derry woman called Deirdre McDermott, whose brother was in jail, used to sell on Fublocht in Belfield. At the foot of the steps of the, you know, there was the staircases crossed, and she took one, I took the other, and she'd be shouting up, "Did you sell any yet, Anne?" I was going, "No, but I had 4 arguments and 3 threats." It really honed your skills. You know, you had to be able to justify what you were selling was a legitimate point of view. Yeah, so it was, you know, and then after the ceasefire, sure, the whole country was in Sinn Féin. It was all the party, and they were all talking like as if they'd been there all the time. It was not a mainstream position at all. And as I say, as you know, after the ceasefire, then things did change. But with that came, as I was talking, the new politics of Sinn Féin, the funding, the peace money. And all the community and voluntary groups. In Bloody Sunday, I remember, I was only a medical student, but I remember, you know, in the medical centre with one of the local GPs who'd been pulled out of the pub to deal with what went on. And you asked for ice and you got pillowcases in through the window. The community was very much involved in everything that went on. Pillowcases full of ice cubes for, you know, for the first aid centre. And, you know, people were, you know, it was very much community orientated. But then all of those community and voluntary groups became subsumed by the requirement to seek funding and to fill in forms and to tick boxes and to essentially get on board with the government program. And you could see the way then of course there was competition for the same pot of money within people who were comrades before. And my father used to say the British have the money and the time to employ the best brains in Oxford and Cambridge University, and they work on a 30-year strategy.
Obviously, and you've seen that in Derry. You must have seen that in Derry, because I've read
very much so. Yeah.
When I in terms of how people were targeted to become part of MI5 and MI6, I've read a couple of the autobiographies. I can't remember exactly the name of the guy, but he produced he produced an autobiography and became some sort of an agent for the British government. And it was like Derry Derry and Belfast were the 2 big focuses of all of that attention and brain power, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, it was sad to watch, you know, you know, very much the monetization, and we see it now, the monetization of people who were ideologically principled and many of whom had suffered immensely. And then you got another generation of young people, maybe whose parents had spent years and years in jail, and they had that legacy, and watching them then turning into essentially state agents, state actors. And I think a lot of the absolute willingness to just think the government has their interests at heart comes from that, you know, dependence almost culture that was very much fostered. So where you before you had activists and heroes, then all of a sudden you had state employees essentially. And I don't mean to be disparaging, because again there was good work done, but I think
that's what one question we have in the south here. You know, if I'm talking, I have a good friend in Sligo, and we talk maybe once a week on matters great and small, but whenever we're talking about Northern Ireland, we always bring up the fact that the percentage of people working for the civil service in Northern Ireland as a comparison to the South, it's probably the biggest industry that's up there in terms of public money and public dependence on the state.
Yeah.
Never mind people that are on social welfare and all the rest of it.
Yeah. I mean, particularly in Derry, as you probably know, Derry was the cradle of the civil rights movement, and rightly so, because it was. I mean, my father had a wee business here. It wasn't possible to buy, even if you had the money, you couldn't buy property the Masons and the Orange Lodges, and it wasn't, you could offer thousands more, you weren't allowed to buy it, and my father, as I say, they made fireplaces. There was no possibility of ever getting a government contract, they were building up housing estates and that. It just didn't happen. And you had the only employment. My mother, I'm very proud to say, worked in Tilly and Henderson's shirt factory from the age of 14 until 36. She got married on her 36th birthday. And then the four of us gave her enough bother. but she helped to unionize Tilly. She worked along with, she was sort of secretary to the man, Stephen McGonigal, who was the first person who set up a trade union in Tilly's and that. But apart from the shirt factories, and it is true, the unemployment here was absolutely. So you had that. I mean, Derry again it was founded. Well, it's in Columcille is 600 odd, isn't it? But I mean, there was a settlement on the banks of the Foyle archaeologically, for some 2,000 years. It's the only city of its size and antiquity in the entire of Europe without a standalone university. We still
it's crazy.
Coleraine. It's absolutely insane. And in the short time that I was in the council, that to me was the single most important issue, and remains the single most important issue for Derry to be able to take its place among the cities of the world, if you like. It's stunningly beautiful. And we have fireworks.
Well,
and that's about it.
Given the
You should come and visit someday, Jerry. You'd love it.
Well, I will. I definitely will. I've been in Derry a couple of times, but it might be a blessing in disguise. There's no university system of the university in it, given the way they're gone down here at the moment. But one of the
Gramsci long march through the institutions. They were and as I say, in a way, I mean, I'm not saying COVID was a good thing. Very far from it, because I know how incredibly people have suffered. My phone never stops with people who can't get medical help. It's just over. The NHS is over. It's the only thing the Brits have left to sell now is their health system, and for sure that's going to be up for sale very shortly. They're just printing money and ramping up the debt, and it's the last bit of the family silver, I suppose, and it's over. And so COVID was dreadful in every way, and particularly for children and all of that. But at least I think people now, certainly, I was, I suppose, always a skeptic, but it has wakened an awful lot of people up to the enormity of the how utterly bizarre the way that we live is, this utter dependence upon government, and also the fact that governments actually hate us. They have no respect. It's a
light bulb moment, really. Like, like Micheál Martin gave I was writing about this yesterday. Micheál Martin gave a speech in Oxford University yesterday, and it's like he's living in a different planet to the people on the ground here. What the things he's talking about as being, of primary importance are not primary importance to anyone I meet. And I don't mean just people that were kind of, we'll say, call them in the freedom movement, or, anti-lockdowns, anti-passports. I mean, everyday people don't, or have quite a million questions, a million worries. And I don't get it. It's difficult for them to keep the disdain out of their voices when they're talking about their electorate. It's bizarre. But then Coveney and Martin, I think, are WEF molds, aren't they? Yeah. Look, they're all. Yeah. Look, they're
Martin
all.
Said, where was it? Was it the Michael Collins commemoration last year, where somebody in the crowd played over and over again Martin when he was giving a speech, and he played him saying, "We'll have no talk about backward-looking notions of nationhood and sovereignty," and they just played that in a loop while he was commemorating Michael Collins, and I was watching it going, "Yes."
Now, I suppose talking about all this brings up another point I've noticed, and we don't probably pay as much attention to it as we should, is if you look at you know, if you look at the, I like to call it the freedom movement because it's kind of a positive thing and it incorporates everybody. But one of the things I've noticed is the freedom movement is definitely an all-island thing. In terms of the activists and the interactions and stuff, there's no, I don't get a sense of a border between us on a lot of us on, you know, the stuff, these central things about freedom that we're all talking about, whether it's, you know, bodily integrity or the right to choose what goes into your own body, freedom movement, all that stuff. I get a very much sense that it's good to see that it seems to be there's a lot of integration island-wide.
Yeah, I think I've been ranting in every town square in the country at this stage, north, south, east, and west. Interestingly, in the north here, I was involved in, and I still am, I suppose, associated with a movement called, it was Freedom Alliance from the World Freedom Alliance. But the UK had a political party, which they called Freedom Alliance UK. And I joined that. But in Ireland, we set up a thing called Freedom Alliance Island of Ireland, and it was 4 provinces, and we had a structure which was provincial. So we had Ulster, Munster, Leinster, and Connacht, Ulster being 9 counties. We had, I'd say, as many staunch Presbyterian unionists as we had, you know, sort of people from the Republican side. It was absolutely cross-community. And they got the fact, a lot of them are a bit, they understand the monarchy and they understand, you know, the history, Irish history. They are very much, while they like the border because it gives them power, I suppose, and a bit of control, they understand very much the history of Ireland, and they see this as their country. They would call themselves Irish and British, you know, but as I say, one of my dearest friends and closest collaborators through all of this, and this is me, you know, Irish Republican, I was an Ain too, and you know, I've unashamedly, you know, I've no qualms about my views. Is a man called Billy Stewart, and he and I travelled the country. He came to Dublin. He came, and Billy is an ex-RUC officer. He was chair of the Democratic Unionist Party in Limavady, and he resigned over COVID in the same way as I resigned from Ain too and from Derry and Strabane District Council. Billy, as his wife is the, well, I'm going to say which, what do you call it? The Grand Mistress of the Orange Lodge in Limavady. These are people I would go to hell and back for, and they for me. You know, I was there going, if somebody had said to me 10 years ago, I'd have an ex-RUC man sitting at my birthday party, having the crack, you know, you'd be going, are you insane? Mm-hmm. They're the same as us.
Well, isn't it amazing what the, I suppose, the era has done? It has brought together all the people that understand the value of the different freedoms, and how if you don't have that foundation, you can't be unionist, you can't be Sinn Féin. It's all a mirage without an agreed set of principles about what freedom looks like. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. But you know, it's also, I think there is an awakening. I don't know. It's certainly in the north. I'm not so sure if it's all island. But here, you know, and again, we had a couple of fairly good-sized demonstrations in Belfast. I mean, the street demonstrations are useful for us, I think, to make associations. The state or the supranational entities have that all factored in. They're not remotely interested in how many people go out and block traffic for an hour or two. That plays right, and you know, they've no. It's not going to change anything, not at all. It ruffles the politicians' feathers a wee bit because they realise that, you know, that at some level they're going to have to, you know, confront that. But they understand that as long as they have the media and also the electoral machine, of which more later, Billy and myself both stood as independents at the last election. And as I say, I stood not because I have any illusions about getting elected, or I came within a couple of hundred votes of being elected in 2016 as an MLA, and then I was elected to Derry and Strabane District Council, and then I had to resign because of the whole shit show. But Billy and I both stood, and the polling booth was open for an hour sorry, not the polling booth, I beg your pardon, the count centre. The count was underway 2 hours, an hour and 3/4 before anybody got in to observe. Now, I wasn't there. I know, you know, Billy, but Billy was there. And they just locked up, and they said the conveyor belt had broken down. The security scanner conveyor belt had broken down, so nobody could go in. I mean, really. Yeah. So, yeah, Dominion voting or whatever. And you really couldn't see the piles of votes. And as I say, the reason I stood was to get the opportunity to knock on doors and give them leaflets about their children in particular. We produced a leaflet, fully scientifically referenced with data, stats, hard, you know, and the Bogside, the Cregan, the Moore, Shantallow, Gallia, all of the working class estates are wide awake. Mm-hmm. Not a child has received this gene jab.
Yeah.
A very small minority of the adults haven't. They all regret it. And it was always for good reasons, because that's how evil works, is it takes the good part of us and uses it against us, you know. Mm-hmm.
Just a quick question there, because I suppose what you brought up there about maybe the South not being as on point or on, you know, are not waking up as quickly as perhaps the North. Do you see that maybe as being a sign that we're much more kind of globalized due to the nature of so many multinationals kind of set up plant here for a generation?
Even earlier on, I think Ireland believed what the Irish Times was saying about it. You know, that it was a backward looking sort of bog trotting. And, you know, a lot of people, I remember people saying, you know, when I was at university, they were saying, sure, the roads are far better up there. And what? You know, why are you worried about discrimination and injustice and the fact that your friends are in jail? Sure, haven't you got great roads? And you're just going, why so? Do you know? Yeah.
And did you find the difference when you came down that first, you know, on that first stint when you came down? Was it like a different world in comparison to what you'd seen kind of going on and bubbling in Derry in terms of the trouble that was there and, you know, the the passions?
We regularly had bomb scares at school, regularly. Most times it was people who hadn't their homework done, got their boyfriends to ring in or something. You know, it's just, but you know, and bombs in the city centre where that was you just seriously, you just went another way. They sealed the place off, and you know, and you were used to getting checked at checkpoints. And
was it a frustration for you when you come down south that we weren't, or did it seem like we weren't fully engaged as to what was going on in, you know, you're talking 100 miles up the road, basically.
Beautiful song written about the hunger strikes 90 miles from Dublin town. I married a man from Limerick for his sins, but whenever I went down, this was, you know, I would qualified at this stage, and whenever I went down to meet his family, if he had landed with a wee green Martian with sucker pads in her head, and you know, they couldn't have been any more fascinated by this. You know, it seriously. It was like two different races. Now, again, in my class at college, people liked me, you know, but they still thought I was weird. You know, she's a Republican, and they used to buy in Fublock, but they bought it because they liked me. They didn't buy it, and they put it straight in the bin, not so that I could see it, but you know, it was very, very, and I mean, Irish history has been taught. Well, first of all, the books are written by the victors, obviously, in every history, but Irish history was taught appallingly. It certainly was, even in the North. I mean,
what would your objection be with that specific, like, or as an example, or specifically? Is it the whole kind of
well, the North, the
1916-22 era, or is it more
all of it? Even the Great Hunger, you know, the way that it wasn't talked about. It was Henry VIII and his merry men, and you know, kings and queens of Europe, and you know, it really wasn't. You know, it wasn't examined. Certainly not you know, unless you were sort of maybe at A level or GC or, you know, hires or whatever, they'd have done a bit more. But there was no, you know, the whole narrative of sectarianism, for example, you know, it's like Protestants and Catholics can't get on. That's bullshit. What happened is the native Irish, who were dispossessed and had their land pillaged and taken from them, and who were genocided, happened to be adherent to the Catholic faith. And the planters happened to be Protestants. It wasn't anything got to do with what way you faced when you were, or what prayers you said. It was nonsense, you know. But that sectarianism, it suited them, you know, to put different the main two big political notions, to put them on either side of a sectarian divide, and then pretend it was because we were still stuck in medieval, you know, sort of religious wars. Utter nonsense. The reason was that your professed religion was a badge for how you might regard the state, and your perceived loyalty. I mean, wasn't it Chichester Clark or somebody said that, you know, that the Catholics are inherently disloyal, which was true, because, you know,
that was your badge.
It was, Dublin was our capital, and partition was an unjust and illegal and unconstitutional. I mean, we had in the house I grew up in, the first dial, the 1918 general election, the 1918 general election, and the absolute rock solid mandate given to Irish independence at that time was the only thing. Nothing after that was recognised, and my father would not allow any other name for the two parts of Ireland except the 6 counties and the 26 counties. And interestingly, you still get that in Radio na Gaeltachta. They say na sé Conde, na sé Condes, na sé Condes Fichid. You know, and you'll get that.
Now you're bringing up, you're moving into an area I'm interested in talking about, because again, in the freedom movements, there's a lot of talk about sovereignty, the sovereign nation of the, you know, the sovereign identity of the island. And we've had, and just earlier you referenced you referenced briefly the IRB. The IRB are an organization that, well, let's put it this way: the concept of the IRB has risen its head again, and there are various kind of people trying to do something with it. Let's put it that way. And I'm referencing this, and specifically with regard to an interview Dolores Cahill gave to Matt Letizier, where she kind of laid out, without naming the IRB as being the entity, but she kind of laid out that we're in a 100-year war, or this is going to be a century of a massive strife and change, and that she was involved with kind of trying to build pillars or build structures that will, when it all collapses, will be there for people to take. Now, I'm familiar with the fact that you have a bit of interest or inside knowledge on this, and I'd just like to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah. Well, what other people who are looking at similar ideas in Europe are saying is that Ireland, by virtue of the democratic mandate and the fact that declaration of sovereignty has been maintained until the present day, that we are actually 100 years ahead of them. Because I mean, this idea of national sovereignty, rather than being the pawn of supranational bodies like the United Nations and the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum, and, you know, the whole yada yada list of people who actually do, you know, the governments are just here as sort of gatekeepers or box tickers to implement the policies that are handed down from above with absolutely no democratic accountability. So the people who are much more able than I may add, are looking at ways. I mean, as I've used this analogy before, there's a bullseye there that we can take this filthy, rotten, and it is the banks, the central banks, and the hegemony they have over people, and the power that they have, and the way that the billionaires can play us like pawns. There's a bullseye there, and the more people are aiming at that, because it's a very, very small number of people with immense power, and they're idiots. They're evil and they're idiots. They're not. We tend to think of them as being, you know, all powerful. They're not. They're very vulnerable, and there must be a way of taking that apart. So anybody who has an idea as to how we might approach that as a sovereign nation. And the thing about it is that we know, you know, in natural law and God's law, that we are all sovereign individuals. And so that your sovereignty is not something that is given to you, and it's not handed to you by any government or by any authority or by anybody. It's something that you claim. And once you claim it, you know, well, it's yours by virtue of your existence, but that by claiming it, then you get, and by rejecting the statutes and the instruments that the law and the government and the state and the banks and that put upon you, you can actually step outside of that. So that the IRB, as you probably know, was a secret oath-bound thing in the 1850s. But there are a group of people now who have come together and who are trying to take that, the fact that individuals, the IRB was kept alive across the century without any public, you know, any massive public support, but that claim to Irish sovereignty and jurisdiction over our nation in trust for the people. Don't forget, because at the back of it all, people should govern themselves firstly, and then you move it to families, communities, and you know that has to be the structure of any government that's going to make sense, and that gives total accountability. So as I say, yeah, there's a group of people, and they're, as I say, very, very committed. There's no secret. Now this is all out in the open.
Yeah, that's what, like, you know, it's come on my radar, as I was telling you in before. It's come on my radar from just ordinary people I meet in the street who are very taken with some of the sovereignty ideas, and this kind of people reacquainting themselves with sovereignty ideas. Now, like everything else, I've seen that there's a lot of back and forth between this is the IRB or that's the IRB, but I'm more interested in the ideas, like the ideas that people have or organizations have. And, you know, even tying in with, like, you know, a lot of what I've heard you say there is a lot, there's overlap with what I hear kind of people like the Society of Peace saying about taking back your individual sovereignty and this kind of stuff. And I'm very interested in exploring those ideas because they're quite new to me, because I've kind of been this fool walking around the planet, you know, just, yeah, that's grand, I'll do that,
and
no
so
problem.
say all of us. Thought the word was actually what they told us it was. Yeah. So
but I suppose, what's your sense, is there of the appetite for what you're trying to do with ordinary people? Is it something that you feel is taken off, or is it a hard sell, or are people, because I told you I met two people who came up to me, and they were actually subscribers of my Substack, and they handed me cash. She says, I read all your stuff, but we don't believe in you know, we're off the banks, we don't do any of that stuff. And they started talking about the IRB, and we had about an hour of conversation, and it was just pure. What captured me was that they were captured in the sense that they really believed in what was being proposed. So I suppose that's why I'm interested in it.
Yeah. Well, again, who knows? Like, as I say, who knows what's going to work? This seems to me to be an idea which, as I say, it doesn't belong to, you know, there's people saying it's not democratic. These are self-appointed people who have, and it really isn't like that. I worked very hard. I was 40 years a GP. I retired. I thought at this stage of my life I'd be playing golf in the Mediterranean. You know, that was kind of somewhere, and you know, in the you know, my children would be.
All you have to do is sign up to the WEFN, and you can do all that.
The adult children living at home, the quitters. Joe he's a professional skateboarder in Germany, and he's home living with his mammy and all that. You know, all of that. The world has changed. So I get up every morning and put my arse under my shoulders, and I have never worked as hard in my life. And I am quite happy to drive the length of Ireland to go to a meeting if I think my presence there is going to in any way move forward a project which helps the people of this nation take back their nation and their sovereignty. Now, for me, I'm an old woman. I have no, if anybody wants to take my place, and you know, that has this energy, and let them tear away, I will very happily curl up with a good book somewhere, and you know, and it's dangerous work. Those of us who are in any way effective, and I include you among this, I include John Waters, I include Aisling O'Loughlin, all the people, you know, all of us are targets, because these people do not like to be challenged. It's particularly, and once you start being effective, yeah. I see it. I as you know, have been suspended from practicing medicine. And I got the General Medical Council to actually admit on the record the other day at my third hearing. I go to the hearing and represent myself and just tear strips off them. They said, we are not interested in data or evidence. We're not here to make a judgment on data or evidence. We are here to make a risk assessment. And the risk is that if you're saying things which go against public health guidelines, then that is misinformation as defined. I mean, it is. Stalin would be proud of the logic. It's incredible. So anyway, what I'm saying is that thing, status of you being a doctor, they are, once you start, I am taken, you know, I have in equity, I have the entire hierarchy of the General Medical Council in a process of hopefully commercial liens against them. And again, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but they don't like it. So now what's happened is the General Medical Council, who are absolutely captured by the pharmaceutical industry, are coming back to people around me. For example, I volunteer in a wee early pregnancy support centre, do a bit of scanning for them. I take a picture of a baby. Instead of using a camera, I use an ultrasound scan. And they're saying I can't do that because I'm struck off, and you know, they're trying to close the place down because of my association with it. These people are vindictive. And once you start doing things, if you don't say, I'm sorry, I could have, whenever I had sort of retired and then went back into medicine during the COVID thing in April 2020, and immediately saw what was going on. It was just so obvious. It was utter nonsense. I was in the GP COVID assessment centre. I've told this story many times, on a 4-hour shift, when there was about 20 staff, 3 doctors, 7 or 8 nurses, pile of admin, a couple of porters, you know, the whole bit. And we saw 3 patients in 4 hours. All of us, 3 patients. And meantime, one of the rock docs was outside during a broadcast saying the place in there is like, I think the words he used were a war zone. Mm-hmm. It was, you know, this was what was going on, and the mismatch. And then the fact that people were not getting any help. We weren't allowed to see patients in the out of hours. I went back and I worked mainly in the GP out of hours centre, and I saw the way people were being neglected. Old people were terrified to go into the hospital because they knew if they got sick, they weren't getting out again, and nobody was seeing them. And they were just, the first thing they said was, do not put me into the hospital. I don't want to die on my own. That's what we did. And then counted those people who were died of neglect or died of midazolam or whatever, counted them as deaths from the thing that was driving the narrative. It was absolutely dystopian to see from within. And of course, you know, but yeah, I can't even remember how I got there.
Well, you see, it's a good to bring it. We'll say today. I don't know if you read the Atlantic article that brought up this idea of an amnesty between kind of the unvaccinated and the vaccinated. You know, this kind of
no.
You know, it's like, it's almost like they're taking a poll to test the waters, and with an article like that is like, you know, let's all forgive each other.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing about social media, of course, is it keeps us in our bubbles so that we see, we get a sort of self-perpetuating narrative that we're right. A woman that I was in touch with from the beginning died. She had incredible neurological problems after her first jag, and knew she didn't want to take it. It was the old story. Her mother was in a nursing home or whatever again, and she just withered away in front of us. This woman ran an hour a day with a dog, and actually her husband's an alternative practitioner. And she was within a week, she was on a rollator. She couldn't walk, and you could see the muscles twitching on her chest. And she had about 4 or 5 neurologists telling her that there was no possibility that there was an association. They wouldn't even countenance it. And the story that I spoke about, the girl with the young teenager with a clot in her upper arm, I've never seen that in 40 years of practice. It just doesn't happen. And they tried to make her say, oh, well, she hurt her arm. And so that, you know, they would not look at the possibility of harm. And they're still not looking at it.
No.
You know, it's absolutely dystopic. It's insane.
We've literally just had, like, Ireland is some sort of weird alien dystopian country, even compared to the UK.
We can get it back. We can get it back. I think if we just,
I think we do. You can see the water starting to run a bit more rapid now. In terms of stuff, like Louise Rosengrave had it's literally the first story where a coroner's actually looked for information from one of the pharmaceutical companies. That's literally only now. And if you even compare that to the UK have at least what you might say, they have a compensation fund. And it's paid out already to X number of people. They mightn't be recognizing the extent of it or anything like it yet, but there's nothing like that in Ireland. You know, they're barely recognizing there's been one injury. Never mind, you know, any mea culpas about their behavior.
Yeah, I see Luke O'Neill is peddling a new book. How that man can stand in a public place.
I think it's starting to wear on him, because he does. If you look at him, he does not, like, to me, he doesn't look healthy, and he actually, I wouldn't trade places with him for all the tea in China now.
Yeah, it just. I mean, are they actually? Do they believe what they're saying? You know. I think it tells everything that they said that the government officials were exempt from vaccination. Right across the world, that happened. You know?
Yeah, but
then the CEO of Pfizer said, "Oh no, I'll leave that for the old people. Thank you very much. I'll not bother." And expect us to believe it. You know?
And the French minister that came out and questioned whether Macron was, or many of the senior ministers were, but actually, no, Lachlan actually raised, when I was chatting to her, raised a very good point about the problem with the Republic here anyway, and I've never thought of it before. We have such a small number of trusted voices, presenters, like Pat Kenny's, like Ryan Tubridy's, like, you know, but it's a very small number, and people had older people now had long trusted these voices, and when all of them said the same thing, it had a huge impact on the take up and the comfort with people to do it. Now, a lot of the younger generation, you see it, I know it. I have a 19-year-old. He got it. I couldn't talk him out of it. He thought he was right, but I know for a fact that they did it to go back to the pub. They did it to go on holidays. They did it for X summer, and there was no talking to them
Jerry,
about
if you were 19, do you know?
Well, sure, jeez, I didn't. I was in the middle of a ditch with a crashed car when I was 19, so I'm glad it's not turned out like that.
So, but you know what I mean? You know, it's a big lot of pressure for young ones like that, particularly after having been locked up.
Yeah.
You know, they were saying, well, you know, this nightmare will be over if only you just take this wee jag. That Ryan Tubridy's telling you is grand, you know, so it must be true. Yeah. You know, see, I'm sure you're looking at the work of Matthias Desmet and what do you call the other boy, Broody? Is it these people are psychologists? This has been the biggest, most comprehensive and expensive psychological operation ever perpetrated in the human race, and it was the same in every country. The UK Column News talk about this. You know, this has gone on. It's been in preparation for a decade. Mind space, these documents about how you change, behavioral change, you know, how you can channel and sort of get the sheep to go in the right direction. This has been, and it's everywhere. It's education, it's media, it's church, it's everywhere. It's all encompassing, and this barrage. I mean, the black and yellow signs. Black and yellow are like a wasp. It's that thing about. Apparently it triggers your amygdala or something, you know, that it's a danger thing. So those signs, they went up overnight, and I will say it publicly, I am an old lady who's a vandal. I used to go for walks in the sort of places where these signs were, and I tried, and I used to bring tools, you know, knives and things that you could take. You can't move them. They were put up and they were meant to last. You can't take, you know, do you ever try to unpick the sticky on things? They're incredibly high quality. You know, most things at the end of 2 years, they begin to look a bit scabby. They're perfect. These things were made to the highest specifications possible. That all of that was meant to be a message of fear. And now we have energy, now we have money, now we have nuclear war. All of that is feeding in. And this, and funny, I was talking to my brother about this earlier on today. We were talking about this. There's another 10 narratives, the lab leak and, you know, all these things. It's all to distract us, all smoke and mirrors, you know, and we spend a lot of time. I spend far too much time looking at videos on social media and listening to the, you know, they want to keep us confused and atomized and disillusioned.
They want to keep you like this with your hand out. Sorry, it was me. They want you like this. They literally don't want your eyes moving off your phone. That's and like we're probably creating more of the problem here today, but what I mean is that
I mean, I'm actually a great fan of you know, there's some of the things now there you can download. I'm listening to a boy called James Lindsay on a thing called New Discourses, and he's an American intellectual talking about Marxism and cultural Marxism and Freirean education and you know, indoctrination of children, but it's one you can download it and then you can clean the windows or go for a walk. I swim. I have a waterproof Walkman. I swim every morning, and I listen to Patrick Henningsen when I'm swimming. You know, so that those downloadable things are good because you can actually get on with some semblance of a life and still keep up to date. Because as you know, on so many fronts, the amount of information is overwhelming. And there's times I deleted 1,500 emails the other day because just said I can't get through them. Just deleting them. Everything before the beginning of last month gone. I can't, you know.
Yeah, no, I well believe it. Now, one question I want to ask you triggered something in my head there now when you said 1,500 emails. What's the most common question, like medical question, that today that people that ask for your medical advice is on at the moment, or what they're worrying about?
Yeah, there's always the most common question I'm hearing now is, how can I fix this? I've taken 2 Jags. I regret it with my whole heart and my whole soul. How can I make sure, as best I can, that I can mitigate any effects? I also have people, for example, I had a man called at the door yesterday, and I brought him in. He needs a bone marrow transplant, and his best matches are 3 relations of his who are all double jabbed. So that there's those. It's mainly people, and people are terrified, because they're seeing that this isn't going away, you know, that you know, is there another 30? What in America now, the CDC, isn't it another 30 or 19 mRNA jabs added to the childhood schedule? You know, this is not going to stop until you know. So yeah, the other thing is for example, today I talked to 2 people who are going for hospital treatment and who are wide awake, have resisted it all so far, but they need now medical care, and they're being told they need to do this, they need to take these tests or whatever. And one of them's a man who actually was a member of AINTU, and he's a very good friend, and he was just saying, I said there's 2 ways of doing it. You can take a lateral flow test, stick it down the loo, get a negative result, and show it and say, yeah, that's it. Or you can tell them, no, I'm not. You can't collaborate with evil. You can't sup with the devil with a long spoon. You cannot, you know, in any way acknowledge the truth of the requirement for these things. We know the science, and it's bullshit. And for him, it was no choice. He says, yeah. So what you do then is you get the name of the person who's making the decision that, for example, you can't have your endoscopy because you won't have a PCR test. And you say, well, I want, in your private and personal capacity, if I come to harm, loss, or damage, if I accrue any harm, loss, or damage on the basis of your decision to withhold medical treatment from me, which I require, you in your private and personal capacity will be held liable and can have your insurance details. And the whole thing just goes away, you know, whenever. And it's not being rude or cheeky. It's just saying, I'm not doing this because it's a lie.
And the difficulty, and you see the difficulty in Ireland, well, down in the south, we'll say, is people have, and I'm sure it's the same in the north too, is the GP sector were held in such a high esteem by ordinary people down here, that they were almost like you didn't question your doctor, you don't question your priest, you don't question your, you know, local sergeant or whatever it might be. They were pillars of this small town Ireland. And what we found is that they were probably the sector that did the most damage, because none of them stood up in their communities to say, hold on a minute. You know, forget Pat Kenny. You know, I'm your doctor. I know you for 20 years. You know, it's okay to hold on.
Yeah.
Or hold off.
The very first protest I went to in Dublin, Pat Morrissey's, I was to speak, and Pat Tobin, who was the leader of Aintree, I was deputy leader of Aintree and the northern leader and an elected representative for them. And I was scheduled to speak, and Patter had a canary. You can't, my seat, as politicians do. And so but I remember listening to Pat Morrissey and going, what courage, because he's a young fella. Mm-hmm. So it's easier when you're older and you're less sort of financially whatever, you know. And Pat was Marcus de Bruin right from the start was very, very clearly saying what was happening in the care homes was genocide. And I see now 3 years later, when people are calling for an inquiry and the politicians are all trying to sort of, oh, we knew it all along. You know, no, it's not happening. It's on the record. You did nothing. You collaborated with murder of our old people. But there were outliers. But I get it. Here, I emailed every doctor in the Western Trust in maybe May or June 2020 with hard, rock solid evidence that these figures were utter bullshit. Not one got back and said, look, Anne, I'm interested in what you're saying. I don't agree because of, I think maybe you've got this wrong. I think, or I do agree, or whatever. I had a couple of people who said, take me off your email list and don't trouble me again. And the rest just, I've had colleagues lie about me to the General Medical Council. They don't realise that GMC reports all this stuff back to me. None of that bothers me, but it just, they can't say that they didn't know.
No, and they do. They most definitely didn't. They most well, what you can say for certain is they chose not to look at the very minimum.
Yes.
They chose not to look. It wasn't an accident that they didn't know. And that's being as kind as you can be about it, because that's not my opinion at all, but we'll leave it at that in terms of something like, you know, I
find it utterly tragic, because I regarded being a GP, and again, I know that I couldn't work in the system in the South. I couldn't take money. I've never, ever taken a penny from anybody for any medical service, ever. And I keep it that way because then I know I can say that and it's true. Ever. Not for a PSV license, not for a passport form, not for any of it. And to be fair, the practice I worked in was the same. There were 3 of us. We worked together. We loved one another. And we really tried to look after the critters. We worked in a place called Chantallow, which is one of the highest areas of socioeconomic deprivation in the entire UK. And it was an absolute joy to do what we did. And some of it now, knowing we probably did a bit of harm. But a lot of my time was spent trying to take people off stuff. And particularly for young people to try and get them away from essentially what was it? We had a couple of these new people called child and adolescent psychiatrists, and they used to take children with shit backgrounds and horrible family lives and really horrific social circumstances with no job, no prospects, no education, and put them in tablets. What? And I'd be trying to say, if you didn't feel the way you felt, there'd be something wrong with you. And I'm trying to, but all
Can I just ask you a question on that, and before I forget it?
Sorry, I just want to finish what I'm saying about GPs. Is that that went on in every practice in the town, and I'm not trying to make myself out to be anything special, but I cared about them. And whenever I saw that they were being lied to and that the older people were being brutalized and it really pained me. I didn't sleep for 2 months because I was afraid that what I was saying wasn't right, even though it was so crystal clear. And people like Dave Cullen and people like Ivor Cummins and people like Pat Morrissey helped me so much, because I was looking at these people who were so convincingly, and they were from my country. They were people I could really identify with, and say, well, what they're saying the same thing as I'm saying, and you know, that I just found it heartbreaking that people were treated the way they were treated because the medical profession looked the other way and lined their feckin' pockets, and that's what happened, you know. And it's unforgivable. It's unspeakable evil.
Yeah, no,
It really is. And again, I'm not trying to say that I'm a saint, because I'm far from it, but it really upsets me. And what upsets me more is that they are still trying to give these toxic gene jabs to precious children who don't need them and who cannot in any way benefit from them, and they're still prepared to do it. To this day, they're still prepared to do it. How dare they? How can they sleep? I just don't understand.
Yeah. I want to ask you.
I got a bit emotional there, but it's just every now and then the enormity of it all just kind of comes crashing over you, and you're going.
But you're on the. I mean, it's a disappointment, but it's a solace that you stood up to it. You didn't just not accept it. You stood up to try and do something about it. So you don't, like, personally speaking, and it's not about saying, you know, having some, it's not an ego thing. It's a kind of a core of who you are thing, is that, and that seems to me, from not knowing you very well, that's been an element of all your life in different phases of it. And this is just another example of it during COVID.
Yeah,
well, you know, in terms of the activism
on the minority side, but it's the only way. You know, in a way, I'd love to be wrong. I would love that.
Sure, wouldn't we all?
I would take, you would take all that would come with it. It wouldn't bother me. The most, and this is something I don't talk about very much publicly. My eldest son hasn't spoken to me in 2 years. He's a PhD in nanotechnology, and I have 2 beautiful grandchildren that I don't see. You know, nothing that anybody can do to me professionally or publicly is anything to the pain of that. If he landed at my door tonight, I would go out and put my arms around him, because these people are victims also. You know, he's a good lad. He's smart. He's never been wrong about anything in his life, which is a wonderful place because he's young, you know. And but they want us to hate one another. They want to disrupt. This is how evil works. And as I say, we were talking about Aisling O'Loughlin and her faith. I mean, to me, you know, this brings into it. This is a battle between good and evil, and we have to try and get, you know, I'm praying more than probably in the last couple of years than I've prayed ever in the whole of my life put together. Except when I was looking for something, I was very fervent when I was looking for stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is on every front, and it's all encompassing. And it's and I mean, you look, there's so much good happening, and I think, like, you know, and again, the like of what you're doing and the like of what John Waters is doing, and like in towns and villages, there's a wee girl, Katie McGrath in Cork, who's just wonderful. She goes out and stands out in streets and gives out leaflets, and people in Derry do it. We give out 40,000 leaflets here in the town about children, and we have the lowest uptake of jabs in children in Europe, in the north.
Very good. Very good.
So, like, you know, it's you do what you can. You know, there's stuff that stop world control. They've leaflets you can download. If you've access to a printer, print a couple of dozen and just leave them in cafes, or just do something, you know, for people that are, what do we do? And an awful lot of people understand.
But you see a lot of, you know, a lot of people, I do hear too many people talking about trying to do something massive, you know, or get a big, it's the people in your day-to-day life that you can make the most thing. You make a little change here, a little change, you know, little steps. And I suppose what fills me with a bit of hope is I'm seeing a lot of little steps by people. They're moving. They're probably not moving as fast as you'd like them to move. But I'll give you an example. The HSE are very worried, not about the COVID jabs, but the overall take-up of vaccines in newborns now, because it's way down on other years. And when I see stuff like that, it just says to me, all right, they've actually done such a fucking bad job here. Not alone have they destroyed the COVID vaccine era, they've now got people thinking about questioning vaccines of all descriptions. Yeah. And that can only be, I'm no expert on science or vaccines, but that can only be a good thing, that people start questioning every single thing they put into their body. Yeah. And, you know, so there's little things, you see these little kind of shafts of light every so often. So I'm not unhopeful about the future either, although I do think it'll be difficult, and very difficult probably. But I wanted to go back to a question I had on my mind there, because you raised it when you mentioned the 3 women you worked with, the 3 together, and you loved each other and all that kind of stuff. How does a small GP practice interact with the pharmaceutical industry on a practical day-to-day level? Is there an interaction when you have sales reps coming in trying to get this, or is it all with the pharmacies?
Interestingly, it was an ex-pharma sales rep that I knew. I did a program with him way back in for Stephen Kerr in the Irish Inquiry at the beginning. He's the same. He gave up on big pharma because he'd seen it from the inside and realized how utterly rotten it was. And I didn't open my mouth, believe it or not. He spoke to an artist.
I find that hard to believe now.
But that was right back early. You know, I think certainly in GPs who are older than me, there are still a few living. They would have had, there was quite a lot of lavish weekends away, and it happens, you know, and dinners and stuff like that. Interestingly, Vincent, the senior partner in my practice, wouldn't go to anything that was sponsored. I thought, yeah, fair play to you. He was the same, you know, good staunch Republican as well, but he was right. And you know, the insidious marketing, the fact that all the journals have advertisements, all the GP things, flyers have advertisements for these drugs and that, and the whole thing of the double-blind randomized clinical trial. And it's the thing about, I mean, the whole lie they told about 90% efficacy for these vaccines. Whenever they were talking about absolute and relative risk, they were talking about relative risk, whereas your absolute risk was infinitesimally small, so that the efficacy was a fraction of 1%. You know, it's just a mathematical trick. But you know, unless you're and Dr. Malhotra has been very good in this. A lot of this research is just smoke and mirrors. Unless you're very good at going back to sources and picking out and realizing how they frame it, you can sell anything. The whole statin thing is, I mean, you have to be taking, you know, having to be taking them as prescribed for 60 years to get measurable benefit. It's, you know, for the vast majority of people.
But one of the things Desmond brought up, and you referenced him there earlier, is one of like his biggest, I think it was his PhD study was on scientific study, and how basically, I don't know what the percentage he came up with in the end, that like it was something like 90% of all scientific study wasn't proper, you know, wasn't rigorous analysis, or it was kind of fake to a degree.
We got, as an undergraduate, we got I think a week's lectures in statistics or something, but really and truly, you know, doctors don't know how to critique a paper and analyze it and look for the variables that are, you know, that really look at it scientifically. We've never been taught how to do that in a systematic way. And, you know, I think it's actually really interesting. I was listening to a fellow on with James Dellingpole the other day, and I didn't hear all of it. He's an art historian. He's a PhD in art history. But because he was a good researcher, and he'd also, I think, done mathematics at school to a fairly high level, he knew how to research, but he also knew how to look at raw data and draw correct analyses from it. You know, that it's a skill set that certainly isn't being taught in schools now. In fact, critical thinking is not taught in schools anymore, but that's a different subject. I think it's great. There's a new schools opened in Limerick and one in Cork, which are totally independent of the system. And I certainly think, you know, home education, or ideally a place like that, which is absolutely, you know, they have an ethos and they're going to teach the old things like logic and ethics and philosophy and real stuff, history.
Well, yeah, well, I think personally philosophy is a big one that that we don't get enough of in our, just not in-depth study, but in kind of the major kind of streams of philosophical thought and kind of different ways of looking at things. I suppose we're pulling up to an hour and a half now, but I have one question I want to. I know, yeah. I can. The only reason I look now is
because I can tell me to shut up at any time. I'll go away. I promise.
The light starting to go dark. We'll be here. It will be two black. Will be two black screens here in about 20 minutes.
Voices
but the question I want to see is what's the future.
Anyway. Some things never change. The dinner won't cook itself.
What's the present and future hold for Dr. Anne McCloskey?
Again, I am hoping that we're going to win, and I'm going to go to Gidor and look at the ocean and climb mountains and play a bit of golf and read all the books that I've bought over the last 2 years that I haven't had time to get to. That's what I want. The thing with the GMC, it doesn't matter. I mean, they told me a year before they took my license away that they were going to do it if I didn't shut up. So it was a conscious decision that I wasn't going to shut up. So that's all nonsense. I hope to get them in the long grass a different way. If I don't, these institutions are they're the belly of the beast. The fact that they're being paid by public money to keep us safe, and they're laughing at us. General Medical Council, the whole medical insurance industry, the whole hierarchy of government and the Department of Health, and all of that is foul and filthy, and it needs flushed down the. Yeah, it's shocking. For me personally, yeah, I'd like what I'd like to see dairy take seriously. I'd like some proper investment. I'd like particularly the people that are really at the bottom of the socioeconomic pile and have been. I mean, the disparity between rich and poor has never been greater, and but it's not just, it's poverty of I mean the education system, I think, is the key. So these are the things that I think are urgent for people much younger and much more able than I. But if there's anything that you'd like to see happening, I think is putting power back into people. People are very beaten down and very demoralized and very they haven't been given the tools to work out their own worth. I really do, and I think that's where a lot of this confusion is in our young people is. They really don't understand that they are the most important thing in the world to themselves and to other people. That the real dignity of the human person. And again, it's this again is bordering on the sort of faith and you may have guessed I'm a practicing Catholic, but that and I think it is very central that the innate dignity of every human person, and it doesn't matter whether you're good looking or you're clever or you're rich or you're stupid it doesn't matter, and none of your attributes have anything got to do with your worth. Your worth is inherent. It's sovereign. You are a sovereign person. You're the unique in the universe, and it's trying to convey that to people, and then to hopefully that then will make people have that respect for others. It should be an organic thing, and that's why. And I think the like of what do you call the English boy who was talking about the dismantling of a civilization is when you have those values of Christian ethics, I suppose, underpinning a civilization, you will have prosperity and peace and some sort of cohesion. And without them, it's chaos. And that's, I think, where we're headed, unless we can turn this ship around.
Yeah, well, I'd say we have a bit of turbulence to go through yet, but hopefully. But I definitely agree with everything you're kind of saying there in terms of it, and it is very important in terms of the kids to.
I'm meeting a man tomorrow, and I'm going to buy 50 kilos. Is it 50 kilos of spuds off him, because I can't grow spuds, but
yeah, get some turf as well. Well,
no,
you can.
it's the children. You're right, yeah.
No, but but like this is only something I'm waking up to myself. Never mind looking or lecturing anyone else about. Is intrinsically understanding your own worth, and I don't mean that in a monetary sense.
Yeah,
it's that at a very young age you outsource the power to other people to value who you are, like through money, whether it's a minimum wage, whether it's this, that, and the other. And it's very easy to, like, it becomes almost second nature to value yourself in those terms. But when you understand your intrinsic value as a kind of living, breathing, spiritual being, whatever way you express that yourself, well, then you understand. You get a glimpse into how powerful persons individually, but as a collective communities can be. And I think that's an awful lot of what people are afraid of, is that power.
Yeah. And that's what the stuff they're trying to take from us. You know?
Yeah. Now, and we might wrap it up there. I just want to say a final thank you to Dr. Anne McCloskey for giving us 90 minutes of her time today, and it's absolutely flown by for me. Hopefully it's flown by for all of you. So I'm just going to end the recording and say goodbye.